They said no one could escape. Not from this place. Not from a fortress built on rock, surrounded by freezing water, watched by armed guards, wrapped in steel and concrete and certainty. And yet, one night in 1962, 3 men stepped into the dark, and the prison that was never meant to fail did. This is the story of the prison break that wasn't supposed to be possible. Alcatraz, a slab of stone rising from the icy waters of San Francisco Bay. To tourists, it's a landmark, a postcard. But in the mid-20th century, it was something else entirely. It was the end of the line. The federal government didn't send just anyone to Alcatraz. It sent the men other prisons couldn't control. Bank robbers, escape artists, violent repeat offenders. If you caused trouble anywhere else, you were shipped to the Rock. And the Rock didn't forgive mistakes. The cells were small, 5 feet by 9, cold year-round. The walls were thick concrete, the bars were tool-proof steel. Guards conducted counts up to 12 times a day. The water around the island was brutally cold, with currents strong enough to sweep even experienced swimmers out toward the Pacific. Over the years, 36 men attempted to escape Alcatraz. Almost all were caught, were drowned, or shot. The prison's reputation hardened into myth. Escape was impossible. Until Frank Morris arrived. Frank wasn't physically imposing. He wasn't loud. What he was brilliant. An orphan who had bounced between foster homes and reform schools, he tested in the top percentile of intelligence as a child. But his mind had turned towards survival, not scholarship. Before Alcatraz, he had already escaped multiple prisons. When officials transferred him to the island in 1960, they thought they were containing a problem. Instead, they may have been creating a legend. Frank noticed something others ignored. The air vents in the back of each cell. Small, seemingly useless, but the concrete around them was old, moist from decades of sea air. Weak. With 2 brothers, John and Clarence Anglin, quiet men serving time for bank robbery, Frank began to dig. Not with proper tools. They didn't have those. They used stolen spoons. Night after night, scraping the crumbly concrete around the vent, hiding the dust in their pockets, spreading it across the yard during exercise, playing music loudly during practice hour to mask the sound. Slowly, impossibly, the holes widened. Behind the cells was an unguarded utility corridor. Above that, a vent leading to the roof. But digging out was only part of the problem. The real barrier was the water. The bay temperature averaged around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia in minutes. The currents unpredictable, the distance to shore more than a mile. Experts believed survival was unlikely. But Frank didn't need certainty. He needed a chance. Over months, they stitched together a raft from more than 50 stolen raincoats, sealed with steam pipes, glued with prison soap. They built life vests. They crafted dummy heads from soap, toothpaste, and toilet paper, painting them with stolen art supplies. Real human hair from the barber shop was glued on top. On the night of June 11, 1962, they placed the dummies in their beds, blankets arranged carefully, shadows convincing enough in the dark. Then they climbed through the holes, up the pipes, across the roof, down a kitchen vent pipe, and into the black water below. By morning, they were gone. The prison erupted into panic. Helicopters circled, boats searched. The FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in its history. They found scraps of raincoat, a paddle fragment, but no bodies. Officially, the case concluded that the men likely drowned. Case closed. Except it never really was. Decades later, family members of the Anglin brothers claimed they received postcards from Brazil. A photograph surfaced in the 1970s of two men resembling the brothers on a farm in South America. Handwriting experts debated its authenticity. The FBI reopened the case briefly before passing it to U.S. Marshals, who technically still consider it open. Modern title studies later suggested something unexpected. If the men left at precisely the right time, which evidence suggests they did, the currents may have carried them not out to sea, but toward shore. In other words, escape may not have been impossible. It may have required intelligence, patience, and a willingness to gamble everything on a sliver of uncertainty. Alcatraz closed just a year later, in 1963, not because of the escape. Officially, it was too expensive to maintain, but the myth had cracked, and sometimes that's enough. We like to believe certain systems can't fail, that walls are absolute, that control is permanent, but history whispers something else. It tells us that even the most impenetrable structures are designed by humans, and humans make mistakes. Somewhere in the dark waters of San Francisco Bay, three men chose to trust the current over captivity. Maybe they drowned, maybe they lived quiet lives under different names, or maybe the truth sits somewhere in between, unfinished, unresolved. Because the most powerful prison isn't made of concrete, it's made of certainty. And the night Frank Morris stepped into the water, he shattered it.